So our next speaker is Fábrica de Paisaje with Pablo Gerson. Fábrica de Paisaje derives from a metaphorical concept which was born for a particular project on the coast of Uruguay. Since then, the metaphor has been taking a new meaning until it has ultimately become an instrument meant to share a certain generational concern with how to operate with freshness and how to think in depth about the future of contemporary landscape, architecture, and urban design from their peculiar geographical standpoint. That's how they define themselves. So Fábrica de Paisaje regards the territory as a complex field capable of being transformed, and they prefer to refer to the term landscape rather than to other construction which are less ambiguous. Therefore, the landscape is the connective tissue of the territory. It's neither object nor field, and they have conceived their practice as a machine meant to produce landscapes, which is to say connections, cultural, aesthetics, productive, social, ethical, and economic. The project that will be shown today has been developed by Fábrica de Paisaje in collaboration with Pablo Gerson, which is presenting it today. Thank you.
First, we would like to thank Charles Waldheim, the GSD, the Rockefeller Center, Felipe, Pedro, and everyone involved in having this event today. The landscape, or city begins with a roaming, focus or wandering, functional or metaphysical, pragmatic or poetic. The land is through movement. The nomad builds the land, imagines the landscape, and through symbolic actions inhabits the world and builds a new order. Then, can transhumance become a central discourse component of a grand-scale land operation? Even when recognizing the continuities present in the landscape, can specific logics be fueled by recognizing sub-landscapes and co-present ecologies? It is possible to conceive the 7 landmarks as landscape amplifying mechanisms emerging from logics intrinsic and inherent to each place. How can we induce a feelings logic capable of creating unprecedented experiences in the rediscovered landscape? Which are the minimum elements necessary to create a tale and the subsequent transformation of the landscape of the transhumant? To outline these concepts of the park transhumant reservoir, 3 specific codes are used: transhumance, emergence, and tale. Transhumance is a particular way of moving. It is a distinctive characteristic of the cultural landscape of the north of Neuquén. Alternatively, compared to an outlaw or an environmental predator, the transhumant and his practice are an undeniable cultural peculiarity of great poetical charge. For the project, considering transhumance involves the emergence and subsequent intensification of a political, social, and cultural quality to the land. It is not merely about the aesthetic movement of the picturesque, but about a survival activity, an activity of climate efficiency and economic profit, an ecological activity. Emergence is an action code, and project supposes an intervention on the land based on a detailed understanding of its integral logic, features, continuities, its variations, and permanences. Differences are what is registered in cartography. They inform the construction of the land in the face of identical continuities, and they will allow for an understanding of landmarks as practices of an artificial nature permeated by the spirit of each place and emerging from the ambiguity which characterizes stone. The multiple co-present landscapes are retraced, activated, connected, and resignified by transhumance in their cinematic dimension. The variations and differences stemming from an in-depth consideration of the land are a source for a creation of a story, a plot. A plot cannot be created without changes, developments, and movements. By discovering the variations, the emergence in the landscape, it is possible to discover not the dabbling stroller, but he who seeks to recognize that which is essential, as it to show it in a tale and make sense of it through narration. A linking activity which places these elements in a network, in a grid of landscape episodes, is fundamental to make them recognizable for the inhabitant as well from the stroller. This network shall exist in the form of a special transhumance reserve park, an intermittent heterogeneous park with a unique scale. It is comprised of a constellation of places, of which the landmarks shall be the first course. The dry stone wall and the alabaster lighthouse, an unsettling transient object. During the operation conceived as a transhumant park, the visitor center is a landmark and a passageway, a stay and a route, a material instant that encapsulate the operation and the tale. The building is part of a broader, more complex network, and in that sense, its condition as an object dispels before its potential beyond the object. It's not only landscape in itself, conceived as a fraction of nature, as an oasis and garden, but also a replica of the landmarks, an emergence and an intensification. Conceived as a protected space by the dry stone wall, and as an efficient functional program core open to the landscape, the alabaster lighthouse, the visitor center attempts to articulate the two main core codes of transhumance, as a passageway and an emergence, as a landmark. The protected space can be used as a nocturnal shelter for transhumant, courtyard for driving herds, and a cattle watering area, depending on the seasonal movements, and it is also a projection space for the building itself, thus expanding the range of the general and specific functional programs. 6 landscape intensifier, emerging machines in co-present landscapes. Once co-present landscapes are recognized, landmarks are a specific locus for this intensification program. The landscape as a whole is understood as a compound of overlapping, redundant multiplicities. But these multiple landscapes, little local emergence, most of the time exist only in dormant form, overpowered by the dominant or predominant landscape. Part of the purpose of our landmarks is to unveil these dormant presences. Hence the insistence in that the landmark emerges from local conditions, from a singular instant in the land as a biotopic articulator for the creation of an intensification effect and not of a taxonomic generalization as an autarkic and autonomous extraordinarious object. The landmark is created with and not at. Ultimately, it is the landscape that reacts, turning into a landmark. Landmarks, geomorphologic emergencies, then operate as landscape intensifying machines, as clockwork mechanisms rather than as material forms, as effects rather than objects.
Landmark 1, path to Butalon, windows in the landscape through the walls. Intensified effect in accessibility, contemplation, materiality. Butalon's slightly undulated landscape overlooking the creek at a distance and 360 visuals is archetypical to the region. Concept intensified the site by framing those dividing rocks and generating a platform observatory over an undercut contemplative enclosure with gradient vistas. Landmark 2, Epulafken Lagoons, the reflector on Lucerne, image distortion. Intensified effect, reflection, color, ice, water, vapor. The presence of a vast surface of water and the open and the distant vision of the mountain range on several planes, succeeding each other as mirages. Concept intensified the reflections by means of a smoothing surface that acts as a great mirror for the summer landscape or as a perfect platform during winter, generating a camera oscura which projects the inverted effect of the landscape on the alabaster stone sheet. Landmark 3, Huaraco Hill, apparition paintings of peregrines and onlookers. Intensified effect, perspective, peregrination, light. The Huaraco Hill has distant vistas and reapproachment perspectives, which allow for a particular kinetics outlook set around the cult of Our Lady of Lourdes. Concept intensify the religion mystical experience by enhancing the nature of the cultural landmark thus creating a stage of dramatization through changing the parallax effects. Landmark 4, the Fragua waterfall. Water changes the intense source of water. Intensified effect, sound, water, vapor, humidity, moss. The waterfall creates a particular humid microclimate and expresses the seasonal cycle among the moss camouflage and the icy winter gorge. Concept intensify the sounds and vegetation microclimate experience by generating an humid refuge, semi-protected from water and moss. Landmark 5, Los Bolillos, a lone rock, the place for smoke. Intensified effect, geomorphologic, menhir, emptiness. The rocky outcrops of Los Bolillos creating a peculiar geomorphical effect. The landscape becomes a beacon, grooves, and vibrant rhythm is created. Concept intensify the morphological nature of Los Bolillos, creating a trace artificial monolith as a counter-bolillo, a space for protection, fire, and contemplation. Landmark 6, Cajón de los Cóndores, wind blocks, building the wind. Intensified effect, sound, wind, vertigo. The landscape is fractured in a deep canyon that exposes several geomorphical strata and creates a contained atmosphere of wind and condors. Concept intensify the vertigo experience, creating protrusions over rock as a small bridge onto the void. Thank you very much.
So our last speakers in the second panel is Bulla, which I thought was Bulla, but it's Bulla. Bulla is a landscape architecture and urban planning office based in Buenos Aires. During the last 9 years, they have been developing landscape projects and investigations in the city, both in the public and the private fields. Following this path, the office has set up a new point of view of the profession, redefining and breaking the limits of the discipline according to contemporary and comprehensive ideas. During the last year, the office has decided to return to the exploration of the South American territory, recognizing its structure and the landscape behavior under a holistic intellectual growth to rethink under a holistic view that incorporates man and nature as part of a whole. This new approach allowed an intellectual growth to rethink actual territorial issues regarding the environment and infrastructure. With this holistic view, Bulla is producing practical and theoretical knowledge about the discipline that has been been lacking in the actual and academic discussion in the recent years. So please welcome Bulla.
Well, hi everybody. First of all, thanks to the organization for this invitation. It's a pleasure for us to be sharing this table with many friends and colleagues. We designed this presentation in two parts. The first one is a conceptual introduction, and the second one is the project. Well, I'm gonna start. We're Bulla, Ana Garcia Ricci, Lucia Ardisone, a great team sitting down there and who's speaking. We are founders of this landscape architecture and urban planning firm based in Buenos Aires and born 9 years ago. We are part of the new generation of landscape architects in Argentina graduated from the University of Buenos Aires, which its academic program is conceived by mixing two traditional and opposite schools, the architecture and urbanism with the natural sciences. Bulla is part of this hybrid between nature and culture. This interdisciplinary vision allowed to start rethinking the discipline in the local scene, focus in Buenos Aires and later on the rest of the region. Our office works in two facilities devices, the territorial base, BT, where we develop large-scale and urban projects, and the landscape base, BP, where we elaborate the landscape architecture projects in the city. Our workforce is built by landscape architects and architects And on a second ring, a diverse group of consultants such as hydrological engineers, structural engineers, urban planners, ecologists, commercial developers, and social workers. With this flexible structure, we've been working for the last years in many collaborative structures across different disciplines, exploring relations between culture and nature in South America, thinking integrated solutions for the existing cities and rethinking new ways for building cities in this territory. The local practice in Argentina is pretty much young, having its climax on the first decades of the 20th century and suffering an intellectual and projective emptiness during the rest part of this century. This hybrid vision allows us to explore the time scale on landscape, the natural processes, and to reread the local discipline history, bringing it up to date. We understand South America as a whole integrated ecosystem, a complex and dynamic system made by different landscape units and dynamics stronger than the political boundaries. This mapping is, for us, our base roadmap by entering to a region or project, the natural infrastructure. We understand this nature and environmental resources as the great value of the region and the global positioning. Starting from the first populations in South America, like the Guarani territory, which understands the Tecopora as a way of living with the river flows and leaving no footprint. This culture conceives the water structure, rivers, and aquifers as a way of living in the land, from Bolivia and Brazil up to the Rio de la Plata. The Jesuits' maps translate the original landscape and cultures into a productive territorial company by reading the landscape. The Europeans' expeditions in South America lands like Humboldt and Darwin introduces the idea of ecology and cosmos, where all the parts of the biosphere are connected some way. His Argentinian disciple, Florentino Ameghino, and with his Ameghino project, introduces the idea of regulating the flooding periods by creating artificial retention ponds all along the Salada River, stimulating the water as a connection way and creating an hydrological infrastructure inspired in the Ranqueles culture, where we're rethinking this idea on an investigation project called Water Cities. Our local discipline history starts with Sarmiento and follows with the great characters as Charles Tice and Benito Carrasco. Tice, during the last decades of the 19th century, works on many different scale projects. We are interested on the ones that works with the landscape as a new way of urbanism. The Mendoza City, the project for Cataratas de Iguazú National Park, and the Buenos Aires Botanical Garden are part of this heritage. Tice starts exploring the natural pieces by mixing his European culture in the local landscape. At last, this idea of holistic vision is conceived by the landscape ecology theory, where man is part of a whole dynamic system, where microscope and telescope are part of the same knowledge research. The ecoregions are the map for the understanding of the Argentinian territory based on the relationships between flora, fauna, and man. This model allows us to explore many different types of projects in Argentina, Uruguay, and Bolivia, including investigations, domestic projects, urban public spaces, infrastructure, and cities planning.
Okay, so now in the second part of our talk, I'm going to guide you through a special project that we are still working on. It is called Faros La Reserva, and it's a master plan stage project for which we teamed up with architects Claudio Ferrari, Nadia Franco, and Martín Fernández de Lema to rethink a new urban development close to Santa Cruz de la Sierra city in Bolivia. It is very exciting for us to work on a project within Latin American territory and to expand our own frontiers of action. The site is located geographically in the center of South America. On a macro scale and simplifying its complexity, we can say that Bolivia contains two very strong landscape units, the Altiplano and the Lowlands. These landscape units' characteristics build and define the original cultures and their visions of understanding the world. the mountain range Kosha culture, and the Guarani's culture associated to water. In other words, these two ecoregions are the great landscape that models not only the ways in which nature evolves, but also the human culture. The specific site in which we are working is located in the transition of these two cultures, of these two landscapes. The city of Santa Cruz has affirmed itself as a pillar of a national economy of Bolivia, being the department with the greatest contribution to national product and exports, in addition to becoming the most populated and the recipient of the highest flow of internal migration. It is also part of the future bioceanic corridor. The site comprises 600 hectares that respond to the urban growth of the city of Santa Cruz de la Sierra to the west, where the crossing of the Piraí River implied a geographical difficulty and a barrier for continuing the extension of the original city rings. This context resulted in the expansion of the city in a new urban typology of residential private neighborhoods outside the traditional margins of the rings. Zooming into our plot, we can see that it is surrounded by two rivers, the river La Miel and the river Tocotocal, and it is located between the old city and the Amboró National Park that functions as a great source of biodiversity for the area. The client already had a master plan project for the area, but lacked commercial success, and it did not verify with the territory. So the request was to rethink the development with the condition to stick to plot dimensions and densities that were already approved by the city of Porongo. Faced with this, we set out to start working with the premise to understand first the dynamics of the landscape, recognizing that it was its greatest potential and a key success factor. These are some pictures from our first visit to the site, where you can appreciate the exuberance of the flora, the diversity of the landscape, the strength of the canyons, and the potential of the natural territory originated in the Precambrian era. We analyzed the complexity of the territory, the flows and dynamics, the hydrological network, the topographical system, and we classified different ecotopes as relatively homogeneous landscape units. Once we understood the heterogeneous land with its clusters of interacting ecosystems, we began to design. The proposed master plan is based on 6 neighborhood units, which respond to the different ecotopes we classified, paired in 2. The natural logic defines their identity and, moreover, the architectural language, materiality, programs, and the conditions of habitability too. We sought to reduce to the maximum the infrastructure work, such as movement of soil, streets constructions, and facilities, proposing an energy-saving engineering in terms of managing fluids by gravity. A very efficient subdivision of plots depending on the topography, the natural, ambient, and the views. We designed a network of ecological corridors to avoid disconnecting what were already flows of interaction. In order to achieve this, we maintained large intact areas as natural reserves, fulfilling a buffer zone role. A buffer zone is a source that provides diversity to the habitat and facilitates the dispersal of the offspring of flora and fauna through ecological corridors. This network of corridors is present throughout the whole urbanization. Buffers are pieces of landscape that constitute a way for the conservation of the biodiversity, and at the same time, they form a device to solve the limits of each neighborhood. Buffers incorporate the security system, a recreational walking circuit, and a shelter, the compact sewage treatment plants. We added a series of social programs for the new community and areas open to the general public. We developed projects such as the riverfront, natural reserves with educational trekking trails, viewpoints, visitor centers, and iconic lighthouses. A complementary bunch of urban equipment areas proposed along the Loop Boulevard, such as sport clubs, commercial and educational facilities, a research program, and a civic center. A family of architectural and urban buildings areas proposed on each private neighborhood, entrance gates, clubhouses, bus stops, public spaces, and iconic lighthouses. The project seeks to minimize environmental impact. We consider the full range of systems comprising the site's ecology and dynamics to design a new habitat in which nature and culture are interrelated. It is a proposal to inhabit the territory under an integrated vision of landscape and urbanism.
Well, at last, we would like to present Escape. Escape is, for us, our experimental and educational program where we invite many characters from different disciplines. The objective of Escape is to expand our vision and feed up our knowledge. So, thank you.
Okay, so this was the second panel, and in order to further elaborate on what we have seen today, I want to invite to join us Martín Huberman and Santiago Miret. Martín Huberman is the director and chief curator of Monoambiente. He has been trained as an architect, and he practices as a designer and teacher. He received his degree from the Faculty of Architecture, Design and Urbanism at the University of Buenos Aires in 2006, and continued his studies through graduate courses in Buenos Aires and the United States. Upon returning, he opened Norman, determining his interest in experimentation and research projects applied to architecture, design, and cultural management. He's, as I said, the director of Monoambiente, which is an experimental space committed to the development of architecture and design. So welcome, Martín. Our second panelist is Santiago Miret. Santiago Miret is an architect. He has his master in project research, and he's a PhD candidate at the University of Buenos Aires. He's also a professor of Design Studio 6, thesis tutor and continuator at the Centro de Estudios de Arquitectura Contemporánea, la Escuela de Arquitectura y Estudios Urbanos de la Universidad Torcuato di Tella. And he's teaching also at the Universidad de Buenos Aires. In 2014, he obtained a master's degree scholarship from Secretaría de Ciencia y Técnica for his research 1,000 Buildings, Machinic Process in Complex Project Strategies. He has published articles in magazines such as Clarín Architecture, Revista Area, Revista de Arquitectura, Arquis, among others. And he's the compiler of the book Experiencia Pedagógica Creativa and editor of Archivio 8 Symmetry, The One and the Many. As it has been a long and productive day, and we are getting towards the end, we have an amazing keynote also waiting for us by Ciro Naclia discussing with Alfredo Ramirez. But I would really like to ask you, since we have seen many projects today led by architects or offices that at least have been trained as architects, but that nevertheless are offering a broad range of experimentations in which landscape plays the role of an urban interface, plays as an instrument to engage in a dialogue with the territory, with the city, and with its inhabitants. No? So I wanted to ask you if you see this, first of all, what is the urgent question that you believe is behind this, of these emerging projects from the field of architecture? And also, even if many have underlined that there is no structured debate around landscape here, if there is a glimpse of it, in publications like Florencia showed this morning, 2 issues of plot, or some universities are creating courses and master degrees in landscape architecture, where do you think that this debate is happening, and where is the potential for further expanding on it?
Well, first, I think that this is a very good example of what we are lacking, today's exhibition. And because of that, I believe that there's a problem of culture and language. I believe that there are two things that connect us as Latin American, and one of those things is landscape or territory, and the other thing is language. And by saying so, I feel that it is very weird to have a presentation in Buenos Aires for a Spanish-speaking audience with Spanish-speaking presenters, all speaking in English. So I think that the last part of my presentation is going to be in Spanish. También algo que nos conecta a los latinoamericanos es el populismo, o sea que... Pero hablando en serio, creo que primero es un agradecimiento de que hagan esta estructura y que forjen esta estructura, porque sin instituciones como las que ustedes han creado no suceden estas cosas, o es muy difícil que sucedan estas cosas. Entonces, creo que lo que hay es un terreno muy virgen y verde y una enorme posibilidad de exploración, pero nos está faltando mucho lenguaje. Porque justamente el arraigo de que las expresiones sean tan plurales también es una muestra de que no hay dos proyectos iguales. Es decir, son muy pocos los escenarios que se repiten, son muy pocos los escenarios que se publican, son muy pocos los escenarios que se ven, y eso conduce a que la cosa sea chica y no sea grande. Uno de los principales proyectos de Monoambiente es como volver a ganar el espacio que estas disciplinas perdieron en el desarrollo cultural de la ciudad de Buenos Aires en particular, y bueno, posiblemente expandir esos territorios. Y la búsqueda es abarcando como ciertos espacios que están muy ligados al lenguaje cultural de estas disciplinas. Entonces, el primero es la exhibición, el segundo es el archivo y el próximo creo que va a ser la investigación. Estos escenarios son fundamentales para que se desarrollen las disciplinas y que estas disciplinas tengan arraigos plurales y estructurales dentro de su lenguaje. Yo fui tomando nota de algunas estructuras del lenguaje que me parecieron como súper interesantes, que creo que dentro de ciertas posibilidades muy latinoamericanas de entender el lenguaje de varias maneras, y no de no tratar de ceñirlo, sino de abrirlo, empiezan a permitir entender como similitudes entre los diferentes escenarios, como el ecosistema de los wetlands de Iberá, que se trabajaba sobre una estructura de landscape of fear, el paisaje del miedo. El crecimiento del paisaje en Buenos Aires y en el conurbano de Buenos Aires obedece a la misma regla. Los barrios privados y los asentamientos cerrados nacieron casi particularmente o reconstruyen una política existente, una tipología existente a partir del miedo a la inseguridad y el futuro de un ecosistema más libre, por decirlo de alguna manera. Entonces, yo creo que estas experiencias ayudan a expandir el lenguaje, y en esa expansión del lenguaje, en poder ver los proyectos, que no es muy común poder ver 10 proyectos de latinoamericanos al mismo tiempo, es importante empezar a tender puentes. Entonces, creo que lo que falta son espacios de discusión, espacios de fomento, espacios de desarrollo, que se alejen más de lo privado y que se acerquen más a cierta apertura de lo público. Lo privado hablo como la profesión, ¿no? Hacia como el lenguaje más público de la profesión para afuera.
Well, I will speak in English just for the sake of it, and to generate more confusion. I really like what you say about language, and I was thinking about this thing that you say about lacking and this kind of critical position. I thought I was going to be critical, but I think you were much worse. I will try to generate. I was thinking about some things that are maybe they are not so consistent, because I was thinking just on these things during the day. But I would like to recap about some things that I saw regarding assumptions, because I'm not talking about all presentations, but in general, there was a kind of great quantity of assumptions as good things that at least they shocked me in a negative way, because I don't know, assumptions like beauty or what beauty is, or assumptions about that biodiversity is a good thing, or recycling, or participation as a thing that we all should be doing and we're not, about the green landscapes, about socialization. I think these are all assumptions that are in the wrong direction regarding the lineage of what landscape urbanism was and become. I think that landscape urbanism kind of emerged to deal with the problems of architecture as detached from landscape, and doing so, all these reclaiming agendas in the 90s, right? That architects were reclaiming like great spaces and landscape itself from so many points. But doing so, there were a lot of assumptions that were not there, or they were starting to be constructed. And now a lot of the presentations that we saw today take for taken, or they take for granted all these assumptions that landscape urbanism had been developing through the years, so they are not problematizing them. I mean exactly about questions like why and what for or how we do the things that we do. What I'm trying to say is that it's not just about landscape and how landscape leads with architecture, but embracing and going beyond what landscape urbanism is about and what its lineage is about. At least that's what I was expecting. And regarding the places of discussion that we talked before, I think that this agenda of trying to overcome some ideas from landscape urbanism or the lineage of landscape urbanism are neither in practice and neither in academia, but I think that the best presentations that we saw today were the ones that are leading between these two planes and generating some kind of a background realm or some kind of backstage, I don't like to say niche, but some kind of backstage, I don't know, work that is kind of constructing some kind of friction between these two realms. So I think there is where the discussion is interesting, is where the discussion is trying to overcome these ideas and asking about these three things that I relate with theory, ends, and methodology. I think, I don't know if I'm talking too much, but I'm going to wrap it up so you can maybe ask something else. But I think that regarding the three questions about why, what for, and how, I believe that the best presentations that we saw today were trying to build, or trying to construct some kind of theory regarding organization instead of decoration or design or just problem solving, and they were trying to overcome the issue of scale or common sense when they are trying to generate some ends for the work that they are doing, and trying to work with the problem between architecture and landscape, not as an architectural landscape or an architecture that has landscape in it. And finally, I kind of miss or wanted to see some more of this methodology that landscape urbanism or landscape as urbanism has built over the last years, that was about diagrammatic, systematic processes. I saw very little processes, and to end this commentary, this brief commentary or large commentary, I don't know how to say it, I think that this problem of language that you were talking about, I think it's kind of focus on showing things instead of other things. Like they're showing photographs. There's a lot of photographs, a lot of charts, a lot of infographies and maps, and very little systems, diagrams, and variation of dynamics. I think that's where I saw a problem of communication or a problem in language.
Okay, let's have our keynote further elaborate on this.
Okay, thank you.